7, 6, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to us here. Hello. Scinosium Part 5. And so, everyone, this is very, very exciting because we have a very special guest on today. I call him the Australian version of Bill Nye, the Science Guy. Say hello to Dr. Karl. Hello, who are you? What are you? How are you? And why are you?
Me?
Yes.
Why am I me? Because my parents loved each other very much in a special way my age plus 9 months ago. What was the other question?
How are you?
How am I? I'm well. Been doing exercise. Times are hard in this whole COVID thing. It is a marathon. I'm very lucky in that I've got my family and friends around. I was talking with somebody in Melbourne who hasn't touched another person for 5 weeks. So in my case, I'm well, and I have deep sympathy for those who are doing it hard. How about you?
I'm doing pretty well. I only had a slight dip at work during the original lockdowns, but we've been going pretty well. Queensland's luckily been able to escape the worst of it. So yes. And who are you, by the way, Dr. Karl, other than the Australian version of the Bill Nye? Would you go? What do you?
I'm a highly qualified, not particularly smart person who has been very lucky and has written a lot of books and loves talking about science.
Sounds like the man for me. Well, that was awkward. Matthew, who are you? This is the other guest, Matthew. Who are you? What are you? How are you? And why are you?
I'm almost a doctor, hence the name there. So I have my own little YouTube channel where I try and do science. And as the name suggests, I am almost a doctor, or at least trying to get there. So I'm doing a PhD currently in physics, but I've also got a bit of a chemistry and a business background as well. I'm actually doing quite well at the moment, though, like Dr. Karl's mentioned, this has been a tough year for everyone. So hopefully we can entertain some people with science so we can at least partially forget this year. Science is always awesome, and I'm hoping that we can have some great chats today. I think that covers everything.
Pretty much. And Jen, who are you? What are you? Where are you? Why are you? And how are you?
Who am I? Yeah, I'm Jen. Everyone knows me. Well, most of your people know me. They've seen enough of me. They hate me.
Oh, we love you.
No, they don't hate me. Yeah, I'm pretty good actually. Yeah. You know, you say it's been good in Queensland, but I think we've actually had it better over here in the West. So yeah.
And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Meredith, aka Nevada. This is my YouTube channel, and I talk about stuff and more stuff. So stuff and more stuff. So yeah,
you like a good stuffing there, Mary. Yeah.
And can I ask you a question, Dr. Meredith?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I can see you've got a snake. Is that what do you call the tank that a snake's in? Does it have a special name?
A vivarium.
A vivarium.
Yeah.
And are you a professional or an amateur herpetologist?
I'm an amateur, definitely an amateur. I've only had snakes for about 2 years. I've got another one further back there. She's a children's python as well. So I've got two snakes, a children's and a Stimson's. Both of them are from the Antaresia genus. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I went to a herpetology conference once, and I was absolutely astonished by the number of herpetologists who were missing a distal phalanx in their fingers. So fingers, there's these little bits of phalanges, the little bumpy bits, and quite a few of them were missing the bit just on the end. And I said, how come? And they said, well, the thing is that we're not scared of spiders. We love them. And as soon as we see not spiders, snakes. As soon as we see a new one, we go, oh, aren't you a cute little guy? And reach towards it and bites it on the tip of the finger, which then has to be amputated. So there were a few of them who had amputated tips of fingers. And the pythons are amazing. They can shrink their guts down to virtually nothing and then live off that food for best part of a year. And then when they're digesting a food, they grow their gut back, and they're working harder in terms of how many grams of oxygen they're using per minute per kilogram of body weight. They are working harder than a sprinter, and they're doing it for days at a time. Astonishing,
wow.
Absolutely astonishing animals.
Yeah, no, they are very, very fascinating. This one, the little one, she's significantly smarter than the other one, the bigger one, because she's figured out that you're not supposed to eat humans. But my bigger one, she's over a year old, and she still hasn't figured that out. She occasionally decides to try and eat me, which is highly inconvenient, because you're like, can you let go of me, please? I have things to do.
I've read that if a python is, I think the magic length is 3 meters long, that basically they can do what they want with you and pull you this way and that, and you can't stop them because they've just got too much strength. They're limited by the fact that their mouth isn't big enough to swallow you, but until they decide to let go of you, you've got no choice in the matter. Is that correct?
I don't know about that, but I can tell you, Antaresia is a fairly smaller snake, so they go to about 1 meter to 1.5 meters growth. And so, but I can tell you that my very, very lazy, doesn't do much exercise at all. Children's, she's very strong when she wants to be. Like she's wrapped me up and turned my hand blue, and I can't do anything about it until she decides to let me go. She's quite a strong little thing, and yeah. So, but it wouldn't surprise me that a 3 meter long snake would, if once it decides to wrap you up, you can't do much about it.
No, you could die. I suppose.
People have died from snake attacks, because if they get around your neck, you're gone.
Yeah.
Because they wrap you, they do wrap you, but it wouldn't be a common thing for pets. I'd like as a pet snake, if you feed them well and handle them and everything like that, they wouldn't attack you. You'd get more people getting killed by dogs than you would by snakes. And
Well,
and banana
ones,
brains,
you mean.
pet snakes, banana brains, snakes definitely can get fat. I've had to put I've had to put Lilith on a diet because she was getting a bit of a chonker. She was not happy about that. Because when I was mentioning the fact that she was trying to eat me, that's during the diet. She wasn't okay with that. So okay. So we've had a couple of thousand questions. On Twitter, and also if you want to ask a question in the side chat, please at me, or if you really, really want a question answered, you can also super chat me if you want. So yeah, please let us know any science questions. And I also want to say hello to, there seems to be not that many people in the chat. Hello to Banana Brains and Smitty.
I'd just like to point out that some of the people who asked questions were really, really sus.
Okay, so everyone in the chat, say hello, hello and everything, and yeah. So there's been a huge on Twitter. There's been a lot of questions. So, Jen, would you like to ask some of the ones that have come up?
Oh God, I don't actually have them up in front of me.
Okay, well,
That's
I will.
You go first.
Okay, I will ask one of the more interesting ones that Without a Lawyer on Twitter has asked. I never heard his answer as to why having oral sex and the penis hits the back of the throat, a temporary deafness may occur.
Why did you start with that one?
I get. Do you know anything about that, Dr. Karl?
Yes, about a decade ago, somebody rang into Triple J and said, whenever I'm having oral sex with my husband and his penis hits the back of my throat, I go temporarily deaf. And then I asked my girlfriends to check this out with their boyfriends and spouses and partners, and they all said the same thing happened to them. Why is this so? And the answer is fairly straightforward. You need to know a little bit of anatomy first. But the bottom line is that you're putting pressure on the eardrum and making it less compliant, less able to respond to air waves, pressure waves around you. So let's go down a pathway. So somebody speaks in the world around you, and there are pressure waves, and they go down your eardrum to your eardrum. But before they get there, they have to go down the ear canal. Now, the ear canal is tapered, and it turns out evolution has done a really good job here of what we call, in engineering terms, impedance matching. And so what you're trying to do is match the energy or power in the air into movement of the eardrum. And the tapering does that beautifully. And so when you are listening to the quietest noise that you can possibly hear, the eardrum is going back and forth a distance roughly equal to the diameter of a hydrogen atom.
Wow.
And that's amazingly small. And so read the book by Jim Al-Khalili, Khalili, called Quantum Life. And he reckons that is grounds for reckoning that there are some quantum effects going on in hearing. That was a detour. So back to the eardrum. So the eardrum moves back and forth a distance equal to the diameter of a hydrogen atom. That motion is then transferred to three little bones called the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. The stirrup then pushes on a flexible membrane. On the other side of that membrane is a liquid. And so now you're getting pressure waves going into that liquid. And in that liquid, there are some hairs. We're now talking about the cochlea, Cochlea, if you know your neuroanatomy. And in that liquid, there are some hairs standing up. And there's a whole bunch of them all over the place. And depending on the frequency of the pressure waves, these hairs will be affected, or different ones. And the way they're affected is that they bend over, and when they bend, they give off electricity. This is then caught by the acoustic nerve, the eighth cranial nerve, and it goes into this part of the brain just here, and then it gets processed, and you're thinking, somebody has said, "G'day, Dr. Meredith, how are you?" Right? Now, let's get back to another bit of anatomy, the back of the throat. On the inside of each eardrum, you've got two, one on each side, is a pipe leading to the back of your throat. The eustachian tube, or the internal auditory canal. And it drains that space on the inside of the eardrum, where you've got the inside the eardrum and the three bones pressing, and one of them's pressing up against the little membrane. It drains that space. Now, when you are a child, the main job was to get you out of the birth canal, and so everything was prioritized for having a big head, and all of this area was small. And as a kid gets bigger and grows to puberty, this area gets bigger. And so originally, as a child, the eustachian tube, the internal auditory canal, is at this angle, And then with time, it steepens. So the reason that kids get more inner ear infections, which is not on the outside of the eardrum but on the inside, is that firstly, the angle of draining is not so good. And secondly, here comes a technical term, immature neuromuscular innervation. In other words, the muscles surrounding that floppy tube are not very strong. They're not well hooked up to the nerves. They tend to stay closed, and so it doesn't drain anyway. Now, when the penis hits the back of the throat, it closes off the little hole on the back of your throat and puts a pressure wave up. And suddenly, there's pressure on the inside of the eardrum pushing against it. Okay, now we'll go into an example. Think of a clothesline, and it's clipped at the top with some sheets. And the slightest breath of wind will make the sheet blow this way and that way with a great deal of ease and compliance. But if you were to clamp that sheet to the ground with some string and some steel ropes and some weights, and then apply a bit of wind, the sheet would hardly move at all. In the same way, the eardrum, when a pressure wave comes from the inside, the penis hitting the back of the throat, and pushing on the eardrum, instead of being incredibly floppy and compliant, is suddenly relatively stiff and will not move much. Hence the deafness. Does that make sense? Anything I left out?
It does.
We learn new things every day.
So the moral of the story is if you end up a little deaf after oral sex, don't worry, it'll come good.
I'm glad that you've got somebody went for the moral, not me. No chocolate jam.
I really did.
So Jen, yes, I was actually about to ask if you've got one.
Yeah. Well, BLM Prince of Atheism asked, could we survive the sun going supernova or nova without leaving the solar system?
Can I have a go at that first?
Yeah.
All right.
No.
So, an unfortunate side of our sun is it's too small to go supernova. Unfortunately, yeah. You need to be, give or take, at least 10 times the size of our sun before you'll be definitely safe to go supernova. So our sun, what it will do instead is just swell up like a giant pimple and possibly swallow the Earth in that, and doing so. So yeah, the Earth wouldn't survive that. It will eventually
throw off its outer layers, though, and not in a supernova,
yes,
but it will throw off its outer layers and collapse. So
yes, but before it does that, it has to go through the red giant stage. Yeah. So to understand what's going on, we need to look at how the sun works, where its energy comes from. It gets its energy from pushing hydrogens together. It pushes them really, really close. They fuse together, and you get helium. And that's what it's doing at the moment, and it will keep doing that until it, at the core, where all that pressure and heat is greatest, runs out of its fuel. Then there'll be an event known as the helium flash, and it's not brilliantly understood by astronomers, but what will happen is it'll then start doing that to helium. And the sun will keep going till we get to about carbon. Then it will stop because our sun is not big enough. It's not enough push from gravity to squish those atoms close enough together to get anything higher than carbon. So at that point, when it gets close to that, that's when the sun is going to start swelling up. And
it starts
one slight benefit, the only way we might... Yeah, so the only way we might survive... Sorry?
I don't know why I said that as a question. I knew the answer. I don't know why I said it as a question.
Well, there we go. And so the other thing that we might survive with is that it's meant to swell up roughly to about where Mars is. So it should swallow us. But the solar winds coming off it should be great enough that it might push the Earth out of the way. So we're either going to get swallowed by the sun going giant, or we're going to get blasted by so much radiation that it physically pushes us out of our orbit. So the chance of us surviving that, unless we have some incredibly strong little bunker that's running on maybe nuclear fusion or just the thermal energy from inside the planet, which is, these events even not nowhere near a guarantee, chances are we're not going to survive that. If the sun was to go supernova, it would be even worse for us. And the amount of radiation that comes out of that.
In the solar system.
Yes.
But
What
technically
about
not
the
on Earth, but
Kardashev
within the
scale?
solar system, you could survive. Because if you were further out, you could survive it, but you wouldn't have any energy afterwards without moving back in closer to the pulsar. Well, would it be a pulsar? No, it'd just be a neutron star, wouldn't it?
In our case, it would
No, not a
probably
neutron.
collapse back down to a brown
Brown.
dwarf.
Brown
I
dwarf.
don't think it has enough mass to collapse back to get
So
it.
a
I
neutron.
think for a neutron star, you actually need kind of a supernova where there's enough compression to push
Yeah.
all of the atoms so close that the star, the middle of the star, the core, essentially becomes like one atom. So a neutron star, one of the densest things you can ever find in the universe. Well, without going into the wild realm of black holes. So it's about the mass of our sun, or 1 or 2 times the mass of our sun, but it will fit, the radius will fit within Sydney. So it won't actually be wider than Sydney is, yet it weighs more than our sun,
Yeah.
or has more mass than our sun. Yeah. So you need a lot of mass to get there. Sorry, Dr. Karl?
So, firstly, wouldn't our sun, being the size that it is because of two forces, the nuclear fires pushing out and gravity sucking, when the nuclear fires go out, wouldn't it collapse, I could be wrong, down to a white dwarf?
Yes, sorry, white dwarf. No,
white
I
dwarf.
think I said brown dwarf. I got that
Yeah.
wrong. Yeah,
A white
it'd
dwarf,
be a white dwarf.
roughly the size of the Earth, with a surface temperature of about 10,000 degrees, and the nuclear fire's over, and it's just running off stored heat. And then secondly, you're talking about what will happen to us. What about the Kardashev scale? Where does that fit in with everything?
Well, it depends how advanced we are by the time that happens, or even if we're still here. I mean, we're probably more likely to die out. Well, we won't be here anyway. Whatever is humanity becomes in the future won't be us. We'll have evolved well beyond where we are now if we are still here.
Well, is it worthwhile giving our audience a bit of a hint as to the Kardashev scale?
Yeah.
Probably.
So-
I have no idea what that is.
Excellent. So it begins with a Russian astronomer who was trying to classify
Nikolai
civilizations.
Kardashev? Was it Nikolai?
I don't know. Could you check your Wikipedia? I think he's
can.
still alive.
Is he?
And so there's 3 stages on the Kardashev scale of how much power your society can generate and use. And if there's 3 stages, conveniently you call them 1, 2, 3. And here's some numbers for you: 16, 26, and 36. So they're easy numbers to remember, associated with stages 1, 2, and 3. Now, stage 1 is that the Earth, we, the humans on Earth, generate and use as much power as the sun throws, not in all directions, but in a tiny pencil beam landing on the Earth. And that's roughly 10 to the 16, 10 to the 17 watts. And we should get there in 200 years at our current rate of energy production. Then stage 2, at our current rate of energy production, we're heading for the amount of power that the sun generates in all directions. And that's 10 to the 26 watts, 1 followed by 26 zeros. And we should get there in roughly 2,500 years, which is kind of well after the people in Mesopotamia, literally the area between the rivers, when they already had mathematics and geometry. And 2,500 years ago, those kids in Mesopotamia were doing not just studying the 1, 2, 3 up to 12 times tables, they had to do up to 60 times tables.
Yeah.
Because that was the basis of their counting. And I've seen the 60 times tables fragment at the Museum of Modern Art in Tasmania. And then add
Base
another
60
2.5.
is crazy.
Well, say again, sorry?
But I said base 60 is a crazy concept for us to conceptualize the.
Well, we've got base 10, and it's easy because we've got 10 fingers, but the trouble is the only numbers that divide into 10 are 2 and 5. And if you've got a society that needs mathematics, it makes it hard. And so there was a case of somebody who went on to Twitter saying, I don't get mathematics, it's so stupid, why do you ever need it? And that's a reasonable question. And the answer was that the people who invented algebra and the like, they were dealing with problems such as when this man dies, he wishes to leave 1/4 of his estate to his wife, 1/3 to his mother, and the rest equally divided among the 3 children. Bingo, you need mathematics. Or if you're trying to build a building, you got to know Pythagoras' theorem. And back in those days, every builder had and this was secret, they had their special guilds. And so if you wanted to become a carpenter, you just didn't rock up. You had to be admitted and trained, and you had a secret. And one of the secrets was a rope with knots on it. And when you laid out the knots, if you had 3 knots on one side and 4 on the other and 5 on the last side, blow me down, you had a bloody right angle. And that was a secret that they didn't let on to the general public. They just had this sort of rope lying in their kit. What's a rope for? None of your business. Not going to tell you. Anyway, okay. So that was 2,500 years ago. And so in 2,500 years from now, we humans should be able to generate and use the power output of the sun in all directions. And then on to Kardashev scale number 3 in another 2,500 years, which is taking us back to the Egyptians and the pyramids and glass and so forth. We should be able to generate and use the entire power output of a galaxy the size of the Milky Way.
Which is an astronomical amount of energy when you consider you've got a supermassive black hole in the middle emitting an immense amount of energy just in gravitational waves.
Yeah.
That's an insane amount of energy.
Well, I love, anybody like science fiction besides me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, I'm in heaven. My science fiction friend.
Are you going to mention the Foundation series, are you?
No. So we need a power supply. And I've been kind of thinking, well, chemical sucks.
Oh,
chemical power just sucks.
It does.
What do you do?
It's terrible.
You get a big metal cylinder, you fill it full of explosive, you put some humans at the pointy end, you light the wick, and if it doesn't blow up, after 8 minutes, you're doing 28,000 kilometers an hour or 7 kilometers a second. You're 400 kilometers up, and it's cost you at least $10,000 a kilogram to get there, probably 40. Chemical rockets, they work, and they're a real tribute to the engineers. And I'm very impressed that we humans have been able to make them work, but they suck. And then fusion is another good one, is better, but you've still got the same basic problem.
You're strapping to bombs.
No, deeper. You have to carry your own fuel with you.
Yeah.
What if you don't have to carry your own fuel? What if you get the energy or fuel that's just there in the universe? So there was the concept of the Bussard ramjet, a thing with a big funnel 1,000 kilometers across, sweeping up hydrogen ions and then running them into the fusion engine. So you pick up your fuel as you go along. Or dark energy. There's a lot of it out there. 70% of the universe.
Figure out exactly what it is and how to use it.
Yeah, that's a small problem at the moment.
Yeah, one of the problems is it's called dark energy because it doesn't tend to interact with things.
And we also don't know what it is.
Yeah, but there's no big problem. I think way back to the turn of around the year 1900, and you've got Becquerel, a scientist, and he's got some photographic paper, and the photographic paper will go dark when you put light on it once you do the chemical processing, and he chucks a bit of uranium on it, and it goes dark, and nobody could work out why. And that explained how the sun burns. They had a big problem with the sun back then, around the beginning of around the 1900s, because if the sun was made of something really incredibly energetic like coal's just loaded with energy. If the sun was made of coal, mate, you get 1 million years of burning and that's it. Yeah. We knew how far away the sun was, we knew how big it was, 1 million years, maybe 2 million, and yet the geologists were saying, hey, the world is 20 million, maybe 100 million years old, and we solved that problem, and I reckon we can solve dark energy. And I mean, what about the Higgs field? In each cubic millimeter of the Higgs field, which permeates all of space, there's enough energy in 1 cubic millimeter to equal the power output of the sun for 1,000 years. Imagine if you could tap into the Higgs field and use that to bring you into traveling around the solar system, the galaxy, and if you go for the Alcubierre effect, you could maybe even go faster than the speed of light.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Right.
Very big maybe. Right on, Dr. Jen. You're
Very
right
big
about
maybe.
Maybe. Oh,
Yeah,
see,
but
Go,
I was
Matthew.
I was
actually
just
had
going to
somebody
try and
throw
bring
that-
it back to the original question
Go on,
about
Matt.
whether we'd survive then. If you had that much energy, we could just move the sun.
Well, you
We
can
could
move the
or
sun
move all the
anyway.
planets.
I mean,
So-
technically, with technology, there's a lot of things we could do now with the technology we have now, if we had the wherewithal and the funding to do it. I mean, what you're talking about with the Kardashev scale, we could technically build vast solar arrays and collect the sun's energy in space and beam it back to Earth with microwaves and things like that. So we could get ourselves to Kardashev 1 in less than a couple of 100 years if there was the wherewithal to do it. We have the technology now to achieve Kardashev 1 if we wanted to. And we could move away from non-renewables easily with the financial investment, but it would require a very huge change in economics for the planet to do it. We'd have to almost go like Star Trek, like where money matters less and the betterment of society matters more, which would be a good thing, but I don't see it happening because we're very capitalist-minded and everyone loves their money. So that's
all right. So I'd like to move on because as fascinating as we have thousands of questions,
I'll talk about physics forever.
Yeah, I actually have two. I do have two. I did ask Dr. Karl this in DMs in Twitter, and I don't know if you were able to talk to someone about it, so you can just tell me no, you don't. But I learnt a language as an adult. I learnt Spanish as an adult, and I have I had a client who I work in disabilities. I had a client who was deaf. And as I was talking in Auslan to her, I could not think in English. So if I wanted to go, what do you want to do? I would sign. I can't remember what the signs is like, but my brain would be, ¿Qué quieres hacer? Or if do you want to go? ¿Quieres vamos? Like in my brain, I had to think it. It took me more effort to think in English while I was signing than I was in Spanish. Do you know why that's a thing, or is that because I did ask you that in DMs and you're like, I don't know.
I don't know, but I've gone and I can give you some pieces of information. Secondly, firstly, I remember that when we walked across Spain in 2009 on El Camino de Santiago Compostela, we ran into people who had a hobby of learning a new language every year. And they're up to number 20 at the moment.
Wow.
And for them, the main problem was, what language do you jump off from to get into a new language? And so if they were going to learn, I think, Finnish, they were better off jumping off from Hungarian than from French or English, because there were similarities between the languages. So that's the first thing, that the human brain is sort of stuck with that, having to do it. Secondly, I remember with my father, who could speak 12 languages, at one stage, he spoke the English language well enough that he was an interpreter for the Polish embassy in London. And then the war happened and he ended up in a concentration camp and bad things happened and he survived and he forgot English. And when he learnt it back, he forever had an accent. It was as though the original English that he had learnt had gone and he could never get that back. He got back an inferior language. He had a vocabulary, but he had an accent and he couldn't get rid of it.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
So the answer is, I don't know, Dr. Meredith, as to what's going on, why you have to do it. I think you need a linguist, would be the expert, and I'm not one of those.
Okay, because someone in the chat, I'm sorry if I say this incorrectly, Ragabash Dabler said that seems like it might be a side effect of the law of facilitation, but that's just a guess.
What is the law of facilitation of which you speak?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
Oh,
Yeah, now I want to
But-
know. Okay, hang on. I'll look that up whilst you ask the next question, Mary.
Okay,
and
my
as
next.
to the other thing I looked up, it is Nikolai Kardashev, and he died last year, in November last year.
oh.
Mm.
So.
So my next question probably is for both of you.
What was I looking up, Mary? Sorry.
Law of facilitation.
Sorry.
The latest discovery about the chemical on Venus, I can never remember what it is. The one that they said could be made by microbes.
Phosgene.
Phosphine. And now they're
Phosphine.
withdrawing that claim.
Oh, really?
Yes. I had
Oh.
heard early
Matthew?
on that there were some, like even the paper itself said was a bit unsure as to the conclusions. But when you read scientific papers, most of them will read that way. They always hedge their bets because they're like, this is what we've kind of found, but further studies might show it's wrong. But yeah, I've even seen a few people who are questioning the original discovery. But the basic idea for anyone who wasn't aware is that they found a chemical on Venus that they thought shouldn't exist under normal chemical processes that just happen as we understand other planets. And so the only way you'd get those chemicals, because they're not stable, is to have something like life produce them. Or at least that was one of the solutions from the paper. And of course, that sounds amazing. So that sells, and that's what people went with. So that was the idea. We found a chemical on Venus that shouldn't be there unless there's life.
Awesome.
They did give a few other ideas as to how it might be there. They had very detailed kind of chemical analysis of where it might come from. But yeah, there was always a bit of a question about that because Venus was always thought to be far too hot and inhospitable to support any kind of life.
Now, they also went back through all the data going back 40 years of a study of Venus and have shown that phosphine has been there basically the entire time. So it's not a new thing, it's just new that we figured it out that it's there. So it's been there for a long while within the atmosphere. And Mira and I were talking about this the other day, and they've also found traces of more complex chemical... organic chemical, and which one was it, Mary? Because I've
The amino acids or the base pairs?
Which one of the base pairs was it?
Didn't you say it was uracil?
I can't remember. There's one of them anyway, and there's some other organic compounds that there is actually.
Oh, cysteine.
Cysteine.
Was
yeah.
it cysteine?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Which is an amino acid, yeah.
Yeah, and there's other
Because
ones
we have
that are actually
cytosine,
in the
which is the base
atmosphere.
pair.
Yeah,
Cytosine's the base pair, cysteine's the amino acid.
yeah, I think you're right. So I mean, they found a lot of other things as well in the atmosphere, but just because you find these things, that they are chemical products that can be produced with the right amounts of energy, and there's plenty of energy in Venus's atmosphere, and the right chemicals in the right place. We know this happens. This happens in space, even without a planet. If you've got a gas cloud that's got enough energy within it, you can actually get amino acids forming anyway in space. So
we find organic chemicals on comets and asteroids all the time, but that doesn't mean that there was ever life on there. But it raises the interesting question of how easy is it for life to start? And that's one of the main reasons we keep looking for life on other planets, because it might give us an idea about life on this planet. So if we find life on other planets or other bodies in this solar system, so that includes some of the moons of Jupiter, that's why there's such an interest in ones like Europa, where there might be liquid water or chemical mixing, then it tells us that maybe life isn't that rare. But again, until we do, it's a bit hard. And I work with spectroscopy. Being sure that there are trace amounts of chemicals on a body that is so far away is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And
which is why it takes a lot of study for it, which is why they want to send another probe there to scoop the atmosphere, basically.
Yeah, and I think
going there, you don't know.
Yeah, I remember this. I was actually, I think it was a talk that Dr. Karl gave to the Physics Society that I listened to, where he was telling us about the probe that went to Venus from, was it the Russians? And then they decided to drop the lens out the side so they could take photos. Yeah. But it was a really good example of Murphy's Law, that if there is a way for something to go wrong, then inevitably that will occur.
Vostok 3, was it? Was that the third
No,
cluster?
Venera 13 and 14.
Venera, sorry. 13, 14. Yeah, they had a lot of attempts to land on Venus, the Russians. It was...
Yeah, they even succeeded in getting some balloons to float through the upper atmosphere at altitudes of 50 or so kilometres, where the temperature and pressure are more like Earth at sea level. Down on the ground, due to the massive carbon dioxide effect. So the main reason for the heating of Venus is not the fact that it's closer to the sun, which it is, but overwhelmingly the massive greenhouse effect. And so the temperature down at ground level is 460 degrees C or so, and the pressure is 90 atmospheres. So instead of 10 tons pushing on each square metre, suddenly it's not 90 but 900 tons per square metre. And suddenly your spacecraft begins to disintegrate. So the Russians were the first to succeed. It took them many goes. And finally, they failed with Venera 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. But with Venera 13 and 14, two identical spacecraft, they managed to land on Venus, on the surface, and send back colour photos from the surface of Venus.
Wow.
Now, to do this, they had to have a camera and they had to have a lens cap. The camera lens was made of very pure diamond. And you can still go there and get it, because glass would have melted or done soft squizzy things and lost its structural integrity. And so they also had a device called a penetrometer, which was to be extended to measure certain characteristics of the surface of Venus where the two spacecraft landed. And one of them landed in a place where there were not many rocks, and the other one landed in a place where there were lots of rocks. And with that simple sentence, I've used up pretty well 90% of my entire geological knowledge. I'm pretty weak on geology. And they extended the penetrometer, which had a sort of a little bumpy thing on, a little pointy cone on it. And it was held by spring. So you release the spring and sort of goes boing, and down it goes. And depending on how the pointy thing landed on the surface of Venus, it would tell them stuff. If it sort of went... it was landing on something soft like sand. And if it went boing, oing, oing, it was land on hard concrete and everything in between. And it also had radioactive elements in the tip to give it more information. But now, of course, to take photos, they had to remove the lens cap. And in one photo, you see the lens cap over there and the penetrometer over here. And in the other photo, you see the lens cap. And then the next photo shows that the penetrometer landed exactly on the lens cap. It had 500 million square kilometres of Venus to land on, and it landed exactly on the lens cap. Now, the device was called a penetrometer because it was invented by men, I'm sorry to say. And I was particularly aware of this on one occasion when I was working on the most prestigious science show in Australia at the time, the Midday Show with Ray Martin. And so long as I stuck to stuff I knew about, which was medicine, engineering, science, I was okay. And on one occasion, Ray said, "Look, Karl, we want you to talk about feminism." And I said, "I've heard about it. I know there's a book on it. I know nothing about it. I from what I've heard, I agree with the concepts. I know nothing about it from a theoretical point of view." She says, "Look, don't worry. Look, here's a book. In fact, it's by Germaine Greer. It's signed by her. You can have this book." I thought, "Oh my God, look, just come back on Monday and we'll talk about it." And I tried reading it on the weekend, and various things happened, and I couldn't get through it. And so in the sense that I hadn't read it at all. And so I turned up on Monday, and suddenly hell in a handbasket happened. I wasn't just on for one segment, I was on for the whole show. Secondly, the whole show was not 1.5 hours, it was 2 hours. And why was it 2 hours? Because Germaine Greer was there, and every other feminist you ever heard of in the whole world. And I had no idea, and I hadn't read the book. Right, so we rolled into the first segment, which is always very long, and I'm just sitting there like a shag on a rock with nothing intelligent to say, and I wasn't going to waste airtime by saying nothing. And Ray was looking at me, sort of, when the camera was off him, so, you want to cut in. And so nothing happened in the first segment, and then he really leaned over and said, "You okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." Lying. And then in the second segment, suddenly I understood from what they were saying, I began to understand a concept of what they were saying, but they weren't saying it in plain English. Charmaine Greer, Naomi Wolf, all those people. And I said, so I looked at Ray, and he said, "Oh, yeah." And then the camera zoomed on me. And I don't know if you've done, well, you're doing live work now. We all are. Part of having to do live work is you have to speak in sentences. Each sentence has a beginning, a middle, and an end, maybe a comma in the middle, a subject, a predicate, a whole bunch of verbs, all that sort of stuff. And so so you can't make a mistake and just dribble off into nothingness. You've got to speak in sentences. And to my absolute horror, I heard myself saying, because you have to bypass the sensor in your brain. And I said, well, Ray, as far as I can understand what's going on here, us blokes, we've got to start thinking about penile penetration and start thinking about vaginal engulfment. What the hell did I just say? Oh, my God. Everybody just looked at me, and then somebody made the decision to go to black, and suddenly we were on black. We were putting out black over across all of Australia, and then an ad for sheep dip cut in. That was the only ad they had. They had to come up with something. Well, it was a country ad, not a city ad. And then they sort of told me to get off, and then suddenly the switchboard lit up, and everybody said, "I've got no idea what they've been talking about, but I just understood what Karl said. Can you put him back on again?" And so I had to stay there for the rest of the 2 hours on live TV.
I can't imagine Jermaine Greer was particularly polite about that.
Changing the subject and getting back to Venus. So the thing
I mean, as a segue, at least Venus is the Roman version of Aphrodite, so the goddess of love. So we're good on that part. If there's any segue there.
So the Russians penetrated Venus with their
Trometer.
Penetron,
yeah. But the thing about the whole thing is that gone are the days when you would look through your telescope, like Galileo, and see that Jupiter suddenly had these 4 little dots that moved around and were in different places at different nights and different times of the day. Those days are gone. And so now, with the array in the Atacama Desert, there's a huge gap between a chemical supposedly floating in the atmosphere, all sorts of electromagnetic radiation coming into the telescopes being combined and then processed by computers, and you've got no idea what they're doing until finally you get something that says, "I don't know, but the spectroscopy might look like phosphine," and it turns out there was a problem with the processing maybe as of this morning. And in matters like this, I tend not to rush in because I've seen a whole lot of things that have been pushed forward and then withdrawn. And I like to apply a little flutter filter where I just sort of take it slowly and wait for the noise to ripple down until we finally get the truth. And this, by the way, is not a weakness of science. This is a strength of science where they say we made a mistake and we needed the input of other people to tell us what that mistake was.
Generally speaking, the excitement doesn't come from the scientists. I mean, we get excited about discoveries, but the over-exuberance that, oh yeah, this is going to be life, it doesn't come from scientists. We could be excited that it might be, but we're not saying it's going to be. That comes out of the press by them jumping on something that's going to be, oh look, they found life. No, that's not what the paper says.
As I said, even the original paper tried to outline those problems, and that's one thing. The actual process of science, particularly today, is boring because it's slow, and I think a lot of people don't understand just how slow and tedious it is. I mean, you can look at trying to get a COVID vaccine or anything to do with astronomy. I'm surrounded by people who work in that area. I've seen some of these telescopes. It is a long process. Like I did my honors last year, which is 9 months, and that is short for a research project. Like it's hard to I have an idea that you can spend 9 months on something and that's not enough to get anywhere noticeable almost.
Well, I did hear a cruel... Sorry, go on, yep.
Oh, no, go.
Yeah, I heard a cruel comment from an astronomer who, and this is not entirely correct, and it is cruel, but it's got a tiny, tiny element of truth. And he said, part of the problem is that there's all these art graduates trying to write about science, and they have done the training in arts, but they haven't done the training in science. And there's a small element of truth in there. Some.
Yeah. But I mean, part of it is that if you were actually, I mean, there's a reason the general public doesn't read science papers. They're hard. They're not written to be interesting. They're written to be informative to someone who knows what you're talking about. Like, I can read science papers, and if it's not in my area, it's hard, even after all the time I've spent in science. I mean, Dr. Karl's probably read a million of them.
I find it hard. And it takes me typically it'll take me 10 hours to write a 5-minute story. So I'm doing one at the moment. I did one about hepatitis C and how Egypt was able to get rid of most of its hepatitis C, and that involved dealing with drugs that originally cost $85,000 a dose. And Egypt was a poor country, and it's a feel-good story. They got the whole cost of surveying, identifying, diagnosing, and treating a human being and curing him with hepatitis C. They got it down from $85,000 just for the drug to a total of $131.
Wow.
That is impressive.
That is very impressive. And the cost of a human life in Egypt was $100,000, so it was obviously the way to go. And we can cure Hep C in 95% of people. And in the case of Egypt, the reason they had so much was that there was a bad medical practice in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s when they were treating a terrible parasitic disease caused by a flatworm called schistosomiasis. And the good news was that they were treating it. And the good news was that the treatment was very successful, and it was by injection. And the bad news was they had a bad medical practice where they reused the same needle. And if one person in the chain had Hep C, then so did everybody else further down. And they just said, look, there's no morals here, we're just fixing it. But in the wealthy countries, people with Hep C are often, I think the polite term is marginalised. They're in jail. They have or do use drugs. And rather than just fixing them up, which is a better long-term and much cheaper solution, we're denying them the easy, cheap treatment. Anyway, to do that story took me about 20 hours, and that's a 5-minute story. So when you say there's a lot of work involved, a journalist working on a newspaper doesn't have 10 hours. They've got to have some copy in 15 minutes. We've discovered life on Mars, or on Venus or Mars or some stupid planet. Go and write an article. And they don't have the background training. And they don't have the time. It's not their fault.
Well, they grab the press releases and then use the interesting bits from the press release. They don't even usually use the whole press release. So they go, they're a bit wish-washy in this part of the press release. Let's cut that out and we'll go with the main headline, which is they found life. No, that's not what the press release even said. It's like... Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to another question. Jen, was there one that really caught your eye that you wanted to hear?
Given that we were talking about medicine here, there was one here.
We do have
Dr.
millions of.
Do you think the nanotechnology will be able to create robotic white blood cells within our lifetime?
Yes and no, and why bother?
I kind of agree with that.
Yeah. So I spent a couple of years as an engineer, where 1 year thinking about what to do and 1 year doing it. And by the end of the 2 years, I had designed and built a machine for Fred Hollows, helped with Jackie Joy, to pick up electrical signals off the human retina down into microvolts and diagnose certain types of eye disease. And one thing I learned from my fellow engineers was, don't reinvent the wheel. If you want to make white blood cells, mate, we've got all this wonderful biological machinery that does it anyway. Just take over the machinery and modify to make what you want, rather than making something out of titanium or unobtainium with a nuclear power pack to run it, rather than just running on glucose. So yes, we can, theoretically, and we've got a lot of genetics ahead of us. So for example, I'm betting that each of us, Jen, Meredith, Matthew, me, each of us, because I'm betting that we each came from a European background, and therefore we have a 1 in 20 chance of carrying the gene for cystic fibrosis, which has 0 advantages. Whereas if you are a Chinese person on the east coast of China, the Pacific, your chances are close to 0. So I can see an argument for using CRISPR. The 2 ladies, scientists, won a Nobel Prize in chemistry for it, using CRISPR to snip the cystic fibrosis gene out of our body. So we are going through an enormous improvement in what we know about genetics and biology with this whole COVID thing, and there will be things coming out. So what was the exact question again, Dr. Jen?
They were asking if we'd be able to create robotic white blood cells. I think the intention was to help our immune systems, and I think you kind of answered it. We're more likely to use CRISPR and other technologies to engineer better white blood cells than we already have.
Yeah,
So
actually,
organic robots rather than mechanical ones make way more sense if you're talking about stuff for in the human body.
well, yeah, I'm working this up at the moment as another 10 hours worth of work to come out with a 5-minute story.
Yeah.
But this is a story of living creatures, human females or birds, that carry 2 people or genders in the same body.
Chimeras.
You're talking
Chimeras.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're talking to
So before we go into the bird, sorry, say again?
You're talking to one. I'm a chimera.
Tell me more.
I have both XX and XY chromosomes.
Tell me more. How did you find out? What are the...
I found out in my mid-20s. I had a genetic test for it, and they found out and that.
Okay, so I'll tell a story, and then I'm sure you're going to pop in. Okay.
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 Yep, go for
So
it.
the story begins in 1998 with a 52-year-old woman whom we'll call Jane.
Yeah.
And her kidneys had gone to lunch, so she needed a kidney transplant. She had a family. The obvious thing, you go and check the kids and see who is genetically close enough to transplant across a kidney. Yeah, the closer they are, the less the less immunosuppressive drugs you have to use.
Yeah.
And so then they checked one kid. She had 3 kids, one son. One son was not very good. The other 2 sons were not related to her. They did not have her DNA.
Yeah.
And this was way back in 1988, so there was none of this IVF, surrogate, getting eggs from another woman. In her case, the eggs had come from her uterus, were in her uterus, had been fertilized the regular boring old way by sperm the regular old boring way, and then carried in her uterus the regular old boring way. And everybody all the kids had her husband's DNA, so they hadn't been swapped in the hospital. And how the heck did she not end up not related to her kids? And then it took them 5 years to work it out. So we're looking at 2003, and we're still working on it because this whole gender thing is so fluid and complex. There was an article in the Science.
One ovary that was one set of XX chromosomes and another that was an entirely different set of XX chromosomes, because she would have had during fertilization she was either twins that reabsorbed, or an egg that was dual fertilized but never split. So the chromosomes were different matches of 2 lots of XX.
Yeah. Although it was
You can have
a
it
bit
both
more
ways.
complicated than that, because it's not
yes.
just one ovary or the other. So the way it worked was that, and this ties to the fact that women have 50 times the number of autoimmune diseases that men do. Right? So men in the last two chromosomes, 45 and 46, are X and Y. And the Y is not a big, proud thing. It's a fluffy little pathetic thing. It's just an X with one of the arms knocked off and then really shrunken down. It's as though men are the cheap economy version of the car without the power steering and the no electric windows and boring paint. So whereas women have got an X at 44, 45 and an X at 46. In this woman's case, we think that what happened was that her mother, as per usual for a fertile woman, usually would pop out one egg per month, but every 80 times maybe pops out 2 eggs in 1 month. And they both got fertilized, which does happen. And what you would normally expect was these eggs would lead to twins, but because they were 2 different eggs with 2 different bits of female DNA and different bits of male DNA, they'd be non-identical twins. If you got one egg and then it splits, then the 2 are identical. But if you got 2 that are fertilized separately, you got 2 non-identical twins, and that's what usually happens. But in her case, we think that the 2 fertilized eggs fused into a single fertilized egg with, here comes a technical term, random activation of the X.
Wow.
So, in the case of her white blood cells, because remember we were talking about white blood cells, is what started the whole thing going off. All of her white blood cells have got genuine, up and down the line, 100% Jane DNA. No problems. But her skin, her thyroid, and yes, her ovary has random activation of the X. And sometimes it's Jane, as she is today with her body, DNA, X, or it's her sister who got reabsorbed. And so the first egg was Jane's DNA, and the second and third eggs that she popped out were her sister's DNA. And you can look at the ovary. So it's not as though this ovary is Jane and that ovary is Jane's sister, but it's rather in the same ovary, this cell is Jane, but that one is her sister. And they're just scattered side by side.
Mixed up in weird ways. Chimeras are weird.
I actually, have you heard of semi-identical twins?
Assume I know nothing? Tell me.
Okay. Semi-identical twins, there's been 2 sets of twins that have been identified. I can't remember where one is, but one set is, but I'm pretty sure the second set is from Brisbane. And what happens is that the fertilization happens like an identical twin, as you explained. It was one egg splits in half, gets fertilized, splits in half, which is how identical twins happen. But those eggs were then fertilized again and became chimeras.
What? Hang on. The eggs split. Oh, here comes the coffee.
Oh.
Everybody else, you're waving off the side. Thank you. World's most popular legal drug. Get up for coffee. So hang on. We started off with an identical, with one egg, and it's split.
One egg to make identical twins.
So, and then one or both of them.
They both got
to me again.
They both. I'm pretty sure both got refertilized or whatever. So they turned into chimeras. So they started off as normal identical twins and then became chimeras. So
they got the sperm from the male, gave them either an X from the male or a Y from the male, and that got added into the mix.
I'm not sure the exact how things work, but it was basically what happened was that the egg was fertilized, turned into an identical twin, and then those eggs got refertilized by later sperm, or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because I've been trying to do this story from the Scientific American for about 2 years and haven't got around to it. But they've got a double-page spread, and over here is your boring regular XX female. And over here is your boring regular XY male. And in between, there's a whole lot of options that actually do exist genetically in the real world. that
Because
we
genetically,
really haven't
sex
been.
is a spectrum. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are not just XX or XY. They are the common, but it's a spread on how you can genetically be different in sex. And like for someone like me, where I've got both XX and XY chromosomes spread out, I don't know which bits of my body are which. I couldn't tell you because I didn't test that much, and I didn't really care because ultimately it's not going to make that much difference across my life. But it's fascinating because it's a you've got weird chromosomes because I'm both. I've got both XX and XY.
Wow. And do you have any areas of sweatiness and non-sweatiness in your body about 1 centimeter across, anhydrotic something dysplasia?
I have skin dysplasia where parts of my skin are different color.
Really?
Yeah. You can
How big are the
see a bit of
patches?
there's one of them on my neck.
Wow.
So yeah, and I got a couple of them around me, which look slightly different than that. Yeah.
Wow.
It's kind of fascinating, but
It is
but
fascinating.
yeah. If you want to talk about it sometime, probably not during this stream. But I will have a chat with you sometime, Dr. Karl, if you want to have a talk about it.
I don't know anything about it. This is one of the ones where I have to do 20 hours. So when I did the story on Bitcoin, that took me 40 hours and it just about blew my head. And I should have bought $10,000 of Bitcoin when they were 1 cent each instead of $10,000 each.
Yeah. I
Moving
might
right
actually
along.
go back or move along. I actually have an answer from the person Ragabash Dabbler who was talking about the law of facilitation. It states that when an impulse is passed through a certain set of neurons to the exclusions of others, it will tend to take the same course on future occasions, and each time it travels this path with least resistance. So basically, because I had access to Spanish vocab frequently in a short period of time, I was wired to get the information that are hypothetically, and then they stop there. So basically, they're saying that because the Spanish vocab was in that particular part of the brain, neurons that fire together, wire together, kind of thing. So that's probably what happened. So thank you for that, Ragabash. Also, a couple of people have popped up. Titan Uranus. I call him Big Butthole or Giant Butthole for that. My boyfriend, Not Joe Witness, says hello and he's jealous of me. So, yeah.
I discovered something interesting that I did not know about the buttock muscles yesterday.
Oh, please tell us.
About 45% of the variation in the top speed that you can achieve while running on your legs as a human is accounted for by the size of the gluteus muscles. More buttocks muscles, faster you can run. That's it.
Oh,
wow.
Okay. Fair enough.
So if you've got a big butt, you're going to run faster. Assuming it's
there's other
muscular,
factors.
not fat.
There are many other factors, and the training and your whole life. But certainly it's harder with small buttocks, and it's easier with big buttock muscles.
Wow.
Okay, so there's another couple of questions in that thing that I quite. Oh, the Phineas 12 gauge. It asks, is PSR J1748-2446 AD? I'm going to call that star Jerry. Is it going to last longer than other neutron stars because it's spinning so fast, or is that only linear motion or some other quirk of special relativity?
Matt loves you.
I did actually look at this question. I can't say I've studied it thoroughly, so anything I say, please go double check it. But just to give everyone else an idea, Jerry is a neutron star. So when we were talking earlier about when stars end their lives, if they go supernova, if you don't get a black hole, and they compress a lot, you get the core left over, and it's one of the densest things in the universe, known as a neutron star. And neutron stars can spin, and if they're giving off radiation as they spin at a fairly regular, well, it's orbital mechanics, so it's fairly regular, you get pulses. So hence they're known as pulsars. And when they first saw them in astronomy, there was a big hype because I thought we'd found alien civilization because we'd found a regular repeating pattern in radio waves, and
Which we
it
didn't
turned
think
out
could
like
happen in nature. Yeah.
yes, turns out there was a perfectly natural explanation for that. So that kind of goes back to our early conversation about what was going on with Venus and things. It's always hard, and so scientists theorized that they should be able to spin really, really, really fast. And the idea is that you can get to 3,000 hertz or 3,000 rotations for a star every second. But we've never seen anything quite close to that. So the most they saw tended to be about 100 hertz or less from memory. And then all of a sudden they found this star, and it was rotating at 700 hertz or above 700 hertz. So this star, which is estimated to be about 16 kilometers across, so it would fit kind of within Sydney but still pretty big, is passing us 700 times every second this thing goes around.
Jeez.
It's the fastest known pulsar at this stage. They reckon there might be others, but there's some weird factors going on with astronomy that prevent us from seeing them easily, because it's got a buddy. So this star, this pulsar has a buddy that would normally be feeding material onto it. So its gravitational pull sucks the material off its buddy, but its buddy gets in the way and you get an eclipse, so we can't see it about 40% of the time. But then because it's moving so fast, we have to go and deal with Einstein's theory of relativity. So whether it's special relativity or because we're dealing with gravity, you also have to take general relativity into account. And one of the really cool things about relativity is that time is not a constant. You can mess with time. You cannot go backwards, but I can affect how fast it will go forward. So one of my favorite ones is the twin paradox. So if I had a twin and we put him in a spaceship and we fly him around the universe really, really quickly, or we can even pass him, close to something really, really big with a large mass, like a black hole, without going in it, because otherwise he's not coming back. When we do bring him back, we won't be the same age. And so when this thing spins, there is actually time dilation. So we actually watch it spinning at a different speed to if you were actually on the Neutron Star, ignoring all the physics that would stop us ever actually landing on it. And so the question is, because of this time dilation, would it appear to last longer than other neutron stars? And the answer, from what I can gather, I haven't had a lot of time to read it, but my reading suggests no. Because whilst special relativity should suggest, yes, the time should look longer, general relativity also says that when you have this object, it's not a perfect sphere. Even the Earth is not a perfect sphere. You'd never be able to tell just by looking at it, but when you do the measurements, it's not. So because it's uneven as it spins, it kind of wobbles a bit. And that wobble gives off gravitational waves. And if you lose energy, you also lose mass. So unfortunately, because it's spinning faster, it's losing more energy faster. So from my understanding, no, it would not last as long. But this star is just moving incredibly fast. And I saw a paper, and I've been meaning to read it, where they actually found stars moving forwards or moving across our sky so fast that relativity was also making them look like ovals, where it was physically squishing them, because you can also mess with distances when you deal with relativity. In the same way that you can dilate time, you can also compress physical distances. So as it was going past, it was looking more like an oval than it actually was. So yeah, there's some really weird effects out there, and our poor little monkey brains did not evolve to understand the really big scale or the really small scale if you want to go to quantum mechanics. So yeah, you've got this really fast star, all these cool relativity effects, and I am definitely going to be reading more about this.
Okay. Excuse me. Okay, so we'll move on to probably the last or maybe last question. It's a question asked by Stuttering Chris, who is a good friend of mine. He wanted to know two things. First of all, why does it take 8 minutes? Like, he never quite could get his head around why it took 8 minutes for the light of the sun to get to Earth. And also, the other question is, what is the science against Nofap? So those are the two. Stuttering Chris is one of my favorite people on the planet. He's the sweetest person alive. So
The science against what?
Nofap.
What is that word? Can you spell that word? I'm not familiar with that word.
Capital N-O, capital F, lowercase a-p. It's a movement where they're saying that no masturbation is a good thing. So
Until a minute ago, I'd never heard of Nofap, and yet you tossed it out without explaining it. Have you ever heard of it, Matthew? Jen?
I have unfortunately heard of it before.
yeah.
I'm so uncool, man. I'm
but
so
I
unhip.
am. My knowledge of biology and anatomy is not sufficient to answer that. But I might be able to answer the first question at least.
Yeah. So
So, in terms of why it takes 8 minutes for the light to reach us, unfortunately, in our universe, and when I say universe, everything at least that we can see, nothing happens instantly. It just can't. So even for time, I am not operating at the same time that Dr. Karl, Navadia, or Jen is, because it takes time for the information of what they're doing to reach me, which is, I know, that blows your mind, but because nothing happens instantly, things have to travel, and so does light, and so does photons. So when the photon comes off the sun, it has to eventually get to me. I can't just detect it as soon as it comes off the sun. That photon has to go all the way from the sun, come to the Earth. Chances are I'm not looking directly at the sun. Don't do what Newton did, or you might potentially blind yourself. The photon hits something on the Earth and it bounces back into my eye, and all of that takes time. Why it takes 8 minutes is because light travels at the speed of light. Now, in a vacuum, that does not change anywhere in the universe. And you can actually get that based on, Maxwell's equations. You do a bit of maths and you figure out that if light is traveling as a wave, it must travel at X speed. But these photons, it's like
300,000 kilometers a second. Is that right?
Yeah, I always remember it as 3 times 10 to the 8 meters per second because physics, and I need to know C had to have known C for a number of exams. So, yeah, it's really, really fast. But of course, the distances it's traveling are just immense. So, like, if I had my mug as the size of the sun, Pluto would not be in the same building that I'm in. It's just the distances we're looking at when it comes to astronomy are massive. So if you're thinking of the photon like a little ball, you can think of like a cricket ball. If I want to get my piece of information to you, I got to throw it to you. It's got to reach you. And that's going to take time. I cannot do that instantly. Unfortunately, with our universe, nothing happens instantly.
Quantum entanglement.
Yes, but you can't transfer information that way. Maybe we'll get to that in another video, but it's
instantly, though.
we'll have to get you back on.
You can't pass information, that's the key. So you can. So if we want to find out what's happening somewhere, we got to let things travel at least at the speed of light. It could be potentially slower, but the information takes that long to get to us. So the photons coming off the sun need to reach us about 8 minutes, but to get to Mars, I think it's a bit longer than that. But if you were trying to communicate with someone on Mars with a radio, you'd have about a 20-minute delay from memory.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 20 minutes.
Depends where Mars
because
is.
Yeah,
Precisely,
it will vary.
Right
Orbits
on.
are not perfect circles.
Now, Matthew, what about the difference between a photon and a wave? Is it a photon or a wave that is emitted from the surface of the sun? Is the thing traveling through space a photon or a wave? And is the thing that lands on our retina and interacts with the dyes in our retina, is that a photon or a wave?
The confusing answer is it's both. From all the tests that we've done, it acts as both a photon and a wave, depending on what you want to do with it. And most of the time,
on your interpretation of the Copenhagen thing as well.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other interpretations like pilot wave theory and things like that, but in general, our interpretation of quantum mechanics is that light is both a wave and a particle.
Yeah.
What about when it's traveling in a vacuum? Is it a photon or is it a wave?
It would be technically both, I would say. But this is the thing with quantum mechanics. Everything can be represented as a wave. I can represent myself
good
as a
point.
wave. And if there's no observation, I'm in multiple places at once. But by observation, I just need something to run into me, something to realize that I'm here.
It's
So
the
as
same
long as there's gas,
concept
we'll
that
never see it.
everything is energy. Matter is more or less concentrated energy. You know, you've got
Which blows my mind.
Yeah,
It's
so
just-
Yeah. And at one point, there was no matter in the universe because it was too hot.
it was all energy.
Everything was just energy. I had to cool down a bit. But yeah, so while it's traveling, it's kind of both. And that's the whole point of Schrodinger's cat. It's weird, but it's not meant to really make sense to us. It's kind of weird. And until you observe it, it's going to act as both. But again, maybe that's more of a philosophical question as well, is that if we look at it, acts as both, is it both?
It depends on our interpretation of how the universe is. I mean, it's quite possible that our interpretation of the universe from the way we observe it and everything, it gives us a concept of a universe that is a physical universe. But the universe itself technically is all energy and therefore all waves. So I mean, we could basically say that everything is just a wave, and you'd be fairly accurate in your description of the universe anyway. So
Yeah,
it comes more down to our interpretation of the universe around us, more so than what the actual physical nature of it is, in that sense.
Yeah, everything is a wave at some point.
Everything is a
Everything's
wave.
away. Okay. Well, sorry, I had so many questions and we all went on to a tangent, so I didn't get to all of the questions. But I would absolutely love to get Matt and Dr. Karl back on at some point in the future. If you would both like to come on, of course, it's
Right on. Yep, love to.
Certainly.
So we'll go in reverse order from what I did earlier. So Jen, who are you? What are you? Why are you? How are you?
Yeah,
all that sort of stuff.
I'm Jen from Jen's Lil Corner. I talk about science, LGBT, sex and relationships now for some reason. I won't go into details. Check me out on my YouTube or on Twitter. Yeah, probably not my Twitter because I tend to argue with stupid people a lot.
Isn't that what Twitter's about?
Yeah, that's what Twitter's about. But yeah, go and check me out.
Okay, links are obviously in the description below. Almost a Doctor / Matt. Who are you? What are you? Why are you? How are you? And all that sort of stuff. Shill yourself away.
Why am I? I haven't got a clue. How am I? I appear to have been a lab accident that went wrong. I'm still waiting for my superpowers. What am I? What do I do? I'm as far as I can tell, a Homo sapien, and I try and do science, and I have a YouTube channel, as well as I do also have Twitter. I'm sure the links will be below everywhere else. And I attempt to monitor greenhouse gases for a living. I'm a PhD student, and that's my quick summary of who I am.
Okay. And Dr. Karl, same questions. Who are you? What are you? Where are you? How are you? Why are you?
I'm just here trying to make the world a better place. I did my first story on the global warming. Back then we called it the greenhouse effect in 1981. And I'm writing a book on it at the moment and trying to make the world a better place, in that we'll be able to fix this, make it a more just and a better place. And I'm kind of thinking that the presence of a poor or a sick person lessens me as a human being, and so I should try to remedy that.
Okay. Do you are you on Twitter? Where can we find you?
At Dr. Karl, DoctorKarl, and drkarl.com, drkarl.com. And I think I'm doing a strategic shift. And I think I'm trying to set up something I shall modestly call Carly's Angels.
Oh.
To try and set the record straight. I've been watching, and I was listening to a podcast the other day, More or Less, with Tim Harford or Harcourt from I think it's the Financial Times in London. Wonderful, wonderful podcast, more or less. And he was quoting a whole bunch of examples where the statistics with regard to COVID-19 had been ever so taken wrongly. So, for example, you might read in the Murdoch press that, hey, an 80-year-old person died of COVID. Well, they're only going to live for another month or two anyway. That's a lie. They were going to live for another 9 years. They were wrong by a factor of about 40. And suddenly it struck me that there are, at the moment, as many, in fact, more in the flurry of the moment, more disinformations and lies and mistruths about COVID-19 than there are at the moment about climate change. And
That doesn't surprise me.
I'd like to try and fix it. There is one question of who is benefiting from this. But the other question is, how can we fix it? So I'm trying to set up I don't know, I'm not too sure what I'm doing, but I'm trying to set up a factory where I train people in science communication and with what I've learned, which is not the best way, but it's a way. And then, do you like the name Carly's Angels? It's kind of...
I think that works really well, actually.
Kind of
I
coy,
like it.
isn't it? Dr. Carly's Angels? Like a factory, like in the old days, you'd have the arts painter, the old master, who'd do a little bit of work on the painting, and the vast majority of it was done by the apprentices, and they'd take all the credit. Like, there's so many stories I want to do, and I just don't have time. Like, I was reading something the other day that trees generate not just wind, not just water, but wind. Trees make wind, and that I'd love to be able to say to 4 people starting off in their science communication, write a story on it. I'll show you how. And come back to me after 10 hours of work with the 5-minute story, and let's work on it. And then that way I can sort of get more sciencey goodness out there. Anyway, I'm just sort of running that around in my head at the moment.
I think that's a really great idea. We need more science communicators.
Yeah.
And
I also what about you? And who are you? And where are you? And where do you come from? And who are you? And why are you? And why haven't you given me a cup of tea and a bit of cake, Dr. Navadia Meredith?
I'll try.
Thank you for the virtual cup of tea.
I will always send you virtual cups of tea or coffee, whatever floats your boat. Coffee. Oh, Matthew, can you put you're up to that? I'm jealous. I'm very jealous of that. Yeah, I need one.
Now you can tell from that Matthew is not an astronomer.
Yes.
Because how?
I've got all the elements on there, and pretty much everything heavier than carbon isn't labelled as a metal.
Yeah, because the astronomers have only got 3 elements in their periodic table: hydrogen, helium, and everything else is a metal. Uranium, gold, carbon, hydrogen, fluorine, nitrogen, they're all metals. Don't bother me with the minor details. Stop messing with the mind.
There's hydrogen and helium, and then everything else.
Yeah, that sounds like it. I am Meredith. My channel's name is Navadia. I also have to say a quick thank you to Zolfner for the $5 super chat, saying I forgot to pay. So thank you very much for that. Randolph Richardson also says Matt drinks periodically.
Oh, God.
Randolph, I am ashamed.
Yes, Corny side.
So this is my channel. I do stuff. I have a fairly eclectic range of things to talk about. And yeah, so if you just stumbled on to my channel because of these wonderful people, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Do that also to Jen and Matthew's stuff. Of course, links are in the description below. So thank you all, everyone, for joining. And don't forget, don't give yourself the real prawn.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.